Hello comrades, welcome to the Politsturm stream, and today we will discuss the results and prospects of the communist future in year 2023, the main events and the main problems. Don't forget to hit the like button, share and subscribe if you hasn't done it before. And today I will be accompanied by Comrade Thomas.
Hi, Vasily. Good to be.
Mm-hmm. Few seconds. I see that our Discord panel is not showing on the screen. Yeah, it works now. All right, so we will go with basically the topic of the stream. And the first thing that we will discuss is, well, what is SolidNet and what is IMCWP? To answer that, we need to talk about when these things were organized and what is their purpose. To begin with, SolidNet is a site, and IMCWP is international meetings of communist and workers' parties that were established in the late 1990s, in 1998, to be certain, on the initiative of the Communist Party of Greece. And these initiatives were constantly promoted as a place for discussion. The initial aim was to unite the communist organizations after the dissolution of the socialist system and to reorganize the communist movement and give it more possibilities. In reality, however, these initiatives, both SolidNet and meetings, are described as just meetings and just site. So SolidNet is one site that is being used to promote different materials, news, declarations, and resolutions by different parties, so-called communist parties, members of SolidNet, and there are a lot of them. There can be multiple organizations from one country, and despite being promoted as arenas of struggle against opportunism and revisionism, in fact, these institutions do a lot of questionable things. One can say that they have meetings each year. These meetings of communist and workers' parties, they are held once a year in different regions. And today we will be paying more attention to the last one. This one took place in Izmir, Turkey, and there are a lot of things to say about that. We will start with the question of organizing it. So it was organized in Izmir because the Communist Party of Turkey was responsible for holding this meeting in 2023. And in 2022, it was held in Havana, Cuba. Choosing this place was, I would say, quite usual because Turkey is the country which can be accessed by both so-called Marxist-Leninist pole and social chauvinists. As we have inside information from participants of the meeting, organizing it in other country would make it impossible for organizations like the Communist Party of Russian Federation or the Russian Communist Workers' Party or other similar social chauvinist organization to enter it. Of course, the European Union wouldn't let the representatives of these organizations pass, since they support Russia in the current events in Ukraine. Also, I would like to remind that you can support our project by following like by clicking on the link in your left bottom corner, stream.politsturm.com, and through this link you can ask us any questions which you want to be answered right now online. And now we're getting back to the topic of the meeting, and well, what can we say about this thing? Thomas, would you like to add something?
Sure. Well, every year it's hosted by a different communist party. I believe next year we're going to be talking about it's going to be hosted by the Lebanese. Last year it was by the Cuban. And there's a lot of variety in who's hosting and the basis of the platforms of who's hosting. To talk about TKP, the Turkish Communist Party, they're very close, very comradely with the Greek Communist Party, and these are seen as leading sections of the international. But like you mentioned, Vasily, there's all sorts of groups that attend these meetings, and really, it's hard to find an ideological through point. And I think we're going to talk about some difficulties in these meetings. In actually helping the communist movement and putting forward good ideas and good resolutions. Why is it so difficult to put forward good resolutions? I think we can start to answer some questions like that. But I mean, just imagine last year if you're in the Cuban, you're a guest of the Cuban state, you're a guest of the Cuban Communist Party. You're limited in what you can say in these resolutions. Of course. One of the biggest things that's happening in Cuba right now, and at least in terms of our perspective as Marxist-Leninists and people looking at the development of our movement, what's happening in Cuba is this increasing marketization, increasing presence of the private industry and private market in the economy. But what criticisms can be made about this when your host is the party that's implementing these changes? It creates some problems. And further to that point, it being attended by so many people and hosted by so many people, you have consistent attendance by parties like the Communist Party of China, Communist Party of or Workers' Party of Korea, which is the North Korean DPRK ruling party. And so parties like this are consistently there. And so they're going to consistently make their voice heard, and that has negative aspects if you don't agree with. I mean, the Chinese Communist Party is one of the most powerful political units in the entire world today. So, what we need to engage with that, or the communist movement needs to, what are the effects of the power of the Chinese Communist Party? Are they using it to help the international communist movement? That's the kind of question we should be asking. And so, is it helpful to have these groups be part of this forum? And so, SolidNet and these meetings, they're usually called like an open forum, but I think that's not a complete view. And there's been some positive, or I guess we could say positive developments this year that we're going to summarize, Vasily.
Mm-hmm. And actually, you touched upon very important topic. So one of the problems with both SolidNet and meetings, and I'm dividing them because this is how it was explained to us by the representatives of the Communist Party of Greece, who said these are different institutions, and they said SolidNet is just a site and meetings are just meetings. So one of the problems with them is that there are different organizations that are a part of these institutions, and one can hardly call them communist. And well, you mentioned Communist Party of China, CCP, Chinese Communist Party, which is obviously the Communist Party only by its name. In fact, it's the representatives of the capitalists who are in fact members of this party. There are, of course, a lot of opportunist and revisionist organizations like aforementioned the Communist Party of Russian Federation, French Communist Party, CPUSA, different similar organizations. There are social chauvinist organizations like Russian Communist Workers' Party, the German Communist Party, the Hungarian Workers' Party, and etc., etc. A lot of organizations like this. And of course, the final question is how do they consider this or that organization to be a communist party, that is worth entering SolidNet. And we can say that the difference here is giant. On one side, we have organizations like the Communist Party of Greece, the Communist Party of Turkey, which are known as representatives of the Marxist-Leninist pole. And then we have things like the so-called New Communist Party of Yugoslavia, which is it's quite weird to see this organization being called a party, because they have, as far as I know, only about 100 people in it, and it's basically a social chauvinist group. And they are not the only one. There are a lot of organizations that basically exist only on paper, such as Unified Communist Party of Georgia, a lot of former Eastern European organizations, like even the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And for me, as a Russian communist, it's quite weird that these guys are considered an organization on the international scale. Like, how can we even talk about the parties of the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union itself doesn't exist for more than 30 years? It's basically nonsense. And yes, these things, like, they show that SolidNet has more questions than answers. And another fact is that we constantly see people saying, you don't need to take it too serious. It's only a place for discussions. Well, we're fine with discussing things, but we think that all discussions should have an end. For the whole purpose of discussions. All right, you have theoretical discussion, and your purpose is to find to have proper answer on this or that problem from Marxist-Leninist perspective. But your aim is to get this answer and get it as soon as possible. You see, the situation currently in the world is very dangerous. Communists are being suppressed basically everywhere. In Russia, in Ukraine, in a lot of other countries. And communists approach this crisis unprepared. They don't have any ideological unity. They don't have any organizational unity. These problems, they are real, and they exist today. And they haven't been solved throughout the decades. And of course, you can have discussions, you can have this or that, but these discussions should have an end. And if you're Marxist-Leninist, if you're a real communist, then your aim is to have these discussions, firstly, ended with achieving the goal, given the masses the Marxist-Leninist point of view on this or that problem, and of course to make an impact on the communist movement. Like, yes, there are a lot of organizations with different deviations, with opportunism, with revisionism, with social chauvinism, and our aim as communists should be not just voicing our position or making a compromise. We need to have strength to show all these problems, to call things with their names, not to hide or smooth anything. And this is where we see a lot of problems as well. Like in the SolidNet, for example, we have people who don't like to call things their names. They say, like, we need to have unity, we need to make a compromise, we have to show the visibility of unity, and it's impossible to show that there is a way for Marxist-Leninists without saying how things are in reality, calling, for example, opportunists, or saying that social chauvinists are in fact defending and aiding this or that side of imperialist camp. All these things are impossible without criticism, and these are in fact the problems of the communist movement. And if we get back to the last one, 23rd International Meeting of the Communist and Workers' Parties, we can see that their resolutions and their decisions are in fact far from being a solution of these problems. So I think we will do it this way. I will show you their plan of actions, the plan of actions that was adopted on the last IMCWP meeting, and I will voice them. And Comrade Thomas will give you a brief explanation of is this good or worse? Thomas, are you fine with that?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Mm-hmm. Let me see.
And thank you to all the new comrades who have joined.
Yeah. Hello to everybody who joined later. Today we're covering the International Communist Movement, its results for 2023, and their prospects in the upcoming year. Don't forget to hit the like button, share, and subscribe if you have not done it before.
And we're going to have a link, I believe, to submit your questions from the viewership that we can address, especially if they're related to talking about SolidNet or talking about the international movement. We'll especially focus on those questions. So please send them in if you get the chance.
You can access this link by it's on your screen in the left bottom part, but you can also access it from our YouTube chat. The link is currently in the chat. Click it and support our project. You support communists from Russia, from Ukraine, from Europe, from the United States, and many other places that are currently struggling to achieve a better way, Marxist-Leninist way for the communist movement. So yeah, here is the plan, and the first point, introduction. The Communist and Workers' Parties participating at the 23rd IMCWP in Izmir declare their will and determination until the next meeting to engage as joint and convergent actions on the following main issues. Firstly, opposing imperialist wars, the arms race, including nuclear weapons, foreign military bases, and rejecting all the practices of NATO in the context of increasing class-based propaganda and mobilization against NATO's expansion and aggression all over the world, standing against the involvement of NATO and its allies in the war in Ukraine and in Israel's brutal aggression against the Palestinian people, strengthening the struggle for disengagement from NATO and its dissolution, organizing anti-imperialist, anti-war events on September 21st, World Peace Day, supporting the efforts of the World Peace Council. So, what can you say on this one?
Well, a lot about NATO. We're reading a lot about NATO, and you'd imagine that it was mainly NATO that's relevant today. And I think that's something we have in previous publications and things that, yes, I mean, NATO is very important to understand, and they're, very active in the world, but NATO's not the only imperialist power. NATO's not the only source of struggle or the source of antagonism, especially this year, 2023, and last year. And I think, I mean, we can talk about this a lot, but looking solely at NATO, it really seems odd in the current context. That maybe would have made a lot more sense to have this focus, even 5 years ago. But more and more it becomes more unusual, or it hits the ear with a bad tone these years. But the problem with it has always been similar. People identify, oh, the U.S. and the U.S.-led bloc. That's what's really bad. Especially, we're talking about. I'm an American. We talk about Iraq. Libya. But is the U.S. the only power? Is the U.S., UK, and the Europeans and their allies, are they the only powers that are really involved in these horrors in Libya and Iraq? No. There are other imperialist forces that are really underexamined. And for me as an American, I always thought, oh, America bad, America bad. And I only recently research, I'm beginning to see that, the oil that was gained from, robbing Iraq and Libya, this was sold to, Chinese companies. So there's other, it's not just a NATO thing when we talk about imperialism. And I think, right, the Greek communists know this. So the fact that, SolidNet is making it about NATO shows something that's going on where, the Greek communists, they often have a good position or a good message that they unilaterally present. They've talked about the Chinese imperialism being a growing thing in the world, and they've talked about the Russian responsibility in the conflict in Ukraine, these sorts of things, they're being talked about, and yet they're not reflected in this message.
I bet social chauvinists would say that you dislike this point simply because you're American and you're chauvinist. Uh, However, well, yeah, I'm Russian communist, and I also see no mentions of Russia or China, but it's a well-known fact that these are indeed imperialist bloc, another imperialist camp. They are imperialists and they pursue their imperialist policies around the world. Well, Russia, that's quite obvious. Their interests in Ukraine, but also in Africa, basically everywhere in the world. China is also expanding greatly in Africa for the last recent years. And this main problem, it's easy to spot that there are a lot of words against NATO, against EU, but no words against Russia or China. And this is the question that we came up with when we asked some participants of this meeting, like, what is the problem? Why did you agree on such a bad compromise? And we said that yes, it's a compromise that had to be taken. It's bad, but it's not a surrender in front of opportunists and chauvinists. Well, I can hardly say that it is so, but well, let's go next one. And the next,
Well, and
yeah,
well,
yeah,
one point I want to talk about nuclear weapons. The U.S. is responsible for a bad unilateral policy with nuclear weapons, but this is a two-part dance that the Russia has to increase. This is the process of imperialism where Russia has to respond to increasing nuclear armament. And we say respond, but this is part of increasing proliferation of arms and testing of nuclear arms. It is not just one-sided, not just unilateral. And foreign military bases, this is not just a NATO thing. And I think we've published about this briefly, and I think we could really publish about it more. But the United States pulled out of Afghanistan recently, and this has led to increased foreign military presence by other, like CSTO and China nations. So it's not just the U.S. who has foreign military bases. Recently, China, in the last year or 2 years ago, opened up foreign military base on the border with Afghanistan to, be an imperial power influencing the developments in that area. China has also opened new military and port activities, harbors and ports in other countries like Pakistan and I think Cambodia, things like this. So the United States being the only one having foreign military bases, this is what I was trying to get at before. It's outdated, and it's reflecting of a 1993 attitude. But this is 2023, and we're in a new age almost, where the Western powers aren't the only active ones in the world stage, and we're going to see. Well, right now we see increasing participation of countries like China and Russia in the UN police forces. So if there's going to be a UN police action and UN military action, the China and other countries are going to be involved in that. So we blame United States, but there's a approved intervention, military intervention into Haiti, which is a dreadful possibility. But it's not just the United States; it's also Kenya, which is a very important country in East Africa that has very important ties with China. The China-Kenya relationship is very important, if not just as important as the one between the U.S. and Kenya. So when we say, oh, it's just NATO and the UN is the problem, well, this becomes less and less accurate, and we lose our ability to really respond to the material on the ground. And that's what we as Marxists have to do, is look at the actual things and objective things that are happening on the ground, and not just have a kind of doctrinaire attitude of, we expect the U.S. is the one being the bad guy, and so we're going to talk about that, we should be able to see, the U.S. didn't force Venezuela and Maduro to have this kind of attitude towards Essequibo and the disputed region with Guyana. Venezuela has its own interests, and it's pushing its own interests in the matter with Guyana. So that's not NATO necessarily. And you could say that the blockade of Venezuela has contributed to somehow, but this is simply a matter of these are the interests which are tied up in this economy, which these countries have. Countries like Venezuela and China, they have an economic underpinning that we as Marxists should understand. So that's really what I wanted to get at. Thank you.
And also, I'd like to add on the last several words about celebrating World Peace Day, about the World Peace Council. You see, this organization was quite popular during the Cold War, of course, thanks to the Soviet efforts, to the efforts of the socialist system. A lot of famous people from socialist countries were members of this World Peace Council, different artists, composers, cosmonauts. But now, well, the Soviet Union is no more, and these organizations are, simply remnants of that time. They are supported by no one, and they sounded like they meant a lot for people back then, but now, as the young people join the communist movement, it means nothing for them. And the main question is, should we even try to support them anymore? Like, isn't it better to make something new, something attractive for broad masses, not supporting the old remnants of the Cold War period? Going next, we have the second point. Considering the struggle against fascism and its manifestations as one of the priorities of the international communist movement, organizing the celebration of Victory Day 2024 as a day of victory over fascism in 1945. What can you say here?
And that's interesting to we always often talk about with these resolutions that they're talking about celebrations and the organization of events and celebrations, and like they mentioned at the end here for Victory Day, which I guess is very important. Making sure that there's activity and there's kind of a unified view or unified perspective on uniting activity in this broad way, but the fascist, what exactly is our attitude towards responding to the fascist movement? I mean, we're in a unique historical situation in terms of fascism. So what is our response to this particular time that we're in, where Gerhard Wilders is elected, Javier Milei in Argentina is elected, the AfD, the far right in Germany, all these far right powers are rising in Europe and in some developed countries. What exactly is our response? There, and this is this is parliamentary, this is electoralist empowerment of the fascist movement. Of course we oppose it, but what is the nature of our struggle? I mean, it is of course one of our priorities, but saying in our action plan that it is a priority, I'm not sure will help us figure out what to do.
Yeah, I can say that the main problem here is just like in the previous one as well. So, like we're saying, considering the struggle against fascism and its manifestation is one of the priorities, and of course, here come the social chauvinists and they say, look, we're fighting against fascism, and the United States are promoting their fascism on export. This is the social chauvinist theory. They say, like, the US is literally fighting against Russia in Ukraine with the aid of literally Nazi Ukrainian government. And of course, here it plays in their favor as well. It's quite known issue. But also, of course, like dedicating a whole point of this action plan to celebrating another celebration. Like we have celebrating World Peace Day, we have celebrating Victory Day, and we have another celebration at the next point. It's already looking like not like a plan of actions, but more like plan of festivities. And yeah, since I mentioned the third point, I'll voice it as well. It's organizing May Day 2024 with greater strength as a day of class struggle for workers' rights, for social justice and for equality, for the abolition of capitalist exploitation all over the world, against the criminalization of workers' struggles and trade union rights. I can say that this is quite vague and general. Like, I think communists do it every day, and why should we point on specifically May Day 2024 with any strong differences compared to the previous year? I can say that the next point. You wanted to say something, Tom?
No, I mean, I just have to agree with you. There's not much that can be said explicitly. You know, what can be voiced in terms of elaborating or explaining this point, I'm not sure. But the last sentence or the last section of it is very important. And I think we need to recognize the importance of the criminalization of the worker struggle. I mean, that's rising and rising in the world today, and it's, you know, probably one of our paramount concerns, hand in hand with fascism, is the criminalization of the worker struggle and the abolition of workers' rights and civil rights. Struggling against fascism and struggling against this are very, you know, are twin concerns of ours. But how exactly, you know, does this struggle against this criminalization happen? I guess each party, you know, in each country has their own plan of action when it comes to the particular struggle against this. Yeah, it's interesting to pair it with May Day and the upholding of workers' rights when really, you know, I don't know if we should be in a celebratory mood when things are diminishing and our power is diminishing. In some places, maybe the workers' unions and the communist parties are gaining strength and they're gaining in the ability to struggle against the criminalization. But from my perspective, it seems like a different thing than celebrating May Day.
I agree, basically. The next thing is a bit more important. It says showing solidarity with communists facing all kinds of repression, interference, and bans, and whose political rights and freedoms are being usurped anywhere in the world. So on one side, it's really important because yes, currently a lot of things are taken against communists in Russia, Ukraine, any other countries where reaction is on the way. Communists are forced to act almost in illegal conditions, and this is where communists, Marxist Leninists across the world should have a system of aid where, like, they see someone in danger and they could quickly organize their extraction from this country to save the leadership in the first place, because we all know as Marxist Leninists that it's essential to have the leading cadres of the party in safe place. Lenin, for example, spent a lot of years, basically decades, in emigration in Switzerland, in France, in the Great Britain, and for example, it's Switzerland where he wrote his well-known Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. So yes, this question is important, but on the other side we have only things like showing solidarity. Right, we all know how they show solidarity. They simply make a statement, you know, we have solidarity with this, we have solidarity with that. However, real solidarity always is shown in practical case, and in practice it means supporting comrades by financial aid, by organizing their extraction, as I said, providing them with shelter, with housing. In fact, if we take a look in the history, we can see that even Karl Marx, when organizing the work of the First International, he aimed and he always struggled for the union's aid, union's solidarity with each other to be in practical case. He in his works we can always find letters about assigning money, about collecting money from, for example, British trade union to assist the strike of the German trade union. And these cases are everywhere. And this is where the real solidarity shows. Like, you can make a lot of statements, a lot of resolutions saying, yeah, we have solidarity with this and that, but they would mean nothing if you don't supply them with actual actions. This is the problem.
And we see, well, a particular example of one of these resolutions of solidarity for the Communist Party of Venezuela. And we've published somewhat on this about the PSUV, the governing party of Venezuela under Maduro, is repressing the PCV, the Communist Party of Venezuela, in many ways. Back when the election was happening, I believe this was in 2021 or so, the police of a certain city shut down an electoral office of the PCV. And we have this resolution that they published from Izmir for the 23rd meeting. And I just think it's interesting. I'm scrolling through here and I'm seeing 45 different groups. Many of the groups that attend these meetings signed on to this. The Palestinian People's Party and all these others. But the Communist Party of China does not appear on this signing of the solidarity statement with the PCV. The Communist Party of Cuba does not appear. The Workers' Party of Korea, the DPRK party, does not appear. So we have, their inclusion. China is a consistent attendee, and yet when it comes to resolutions like this, the actual imperialist interests behind their party and their membership of this group shows that China and Cuba and the DPRK, they have a certain attitude towards Venezuela. They have an international capitalist system of relations that cause them to support Venezuela even when it commits imperialism, because of course they also have those same interests. Or I should say that Venezuela is pursuing its imperialist interests. It's always silly when people say doing imperialism, but yeah. So I just think it's we have China and these countries as participating in this meeting, and yet they don't even sign on to this call to cease this repression of the PCV, which China's opinion could affect Venezuela's actions. Maduro would listen if China spoke. Maduro would listen if Cuba spoke. But Cuba and China are there. And I believe that I checked to see if they actually attended this year, and it seems they did. And yet their interests shine through in not signing on to this resolution to oppose their own action. Or this is a resolution that applies to their own action plan, right? The fourth unit of their action plan, and it's already shown what's happening.
Yeah, I would also add some sense myself. You see, the political situation in the countries of the European Union, in the United States, is way more liberal than in Russia, for example. Here you can say different things. You can go for protest, for demonstration, and in Russia they're basically prohibited. You can't do it on your own. You always have to notify the authorities, and even like if you take part somewhere, it's almost 100% chance that you will have police forces on your door on the next day, basically destroying your door, arresting your computer, your mobile phone, and forcing you to pay several 100,000 rubles for allegedly extremist actions. Like, these are the political conditions in Russia today, and this is why it's significant to provide Marxist-Leninists with proper system of mutual aid. Like, all right, we have this situation in Russia, but there is no guarantee that this will not repeat, this will not happen in the European Union. Like, what if in the next year we have, for example, Greece outlawing the Communist Party of Greece? What will they do? They will have teethless resolutions of solidarity from across the world. What they gonna do? Or if Erdogan, for example, bans the TKP, and we know, in fact, that he can do that. We had a coup attempt in Turkey in the previous decade. What if communists are outlawed here? What they gonna do? Well, they gonna receive, again, these teethless solidarity statements, because this is what we have seen from themselves for basically decades. Solidarity with this, solidarity with that, let's issue another statement, another resolution. All these empty things only wash out the actual meaning of solidarity. Like, you're in solidarity not just because you say, look, I'm in solidarity, but when you provide the actual aid, you provide the actual practical basis for your solidarity. This is the real solidarity. During the Soviet era, for example, the workers and peasants in Russia in 1921, they were starving because we had famine in the Volga region. Yet the Soviet government provided the German workers in the rural region who were striking against the government with food and supplies. And otherwise, like, on the contrary, the German workers provided the people of the Soviet Union with funds, with specialists, with food supplies. This was the real solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's it for this point, and going further, we have another interesting thing. The fifth point is honoring international days that mark the struggle of communists with joint statements and campaigns to promote the values of socialism. In this context, on the occasion of the centenary of Lenin's death, to organize events to propagate socialist principles and values, the historical relevance of socialism. Organizing events to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the death of Nelson Mandela. Well, that's... I hardly have any censor comments for this.
Right. I feel like we've mentioned relevant ideas about this sort of thing. But should we really be having the ANC and Nelson Mandela be the model that communists should be looking at right now? I'm not sure. I think that's kind of contrary to the situation we're in, where I don't think an ANC government, in a theoretical new situation, would be very, very productive at all. And I think look at what happened with the South African Communist Party in the 1990s in South Africa. After this period of victory with Nelson Mandela, I don't think the South African workers are much better off today, than they were, back in 1995 or whatever, when the South African Communist Party, left power. So I don't know that the workers want a repeat of what happened in South Africa exactly. And just to say, I don't think apartheid was useless, or ending apartheid was useless. But today, the land of South Africa is still owned by, European, if you want to call them that, capitalists who live in foreign countries oftentimes. So the situation for South Africans and the situation of the kind of national impoverishment is still going on. So I don't want to elaborate too much on this, but I think it's more important to talk about these more concrete issues that you were mentioning before about support and these funds. And I think what's important for us to be discussing is the material impoverishment and the material inability of the communist movement to perform action and perform work. We need money, and we need not just money as the primary thing, but we need an organizational ability, and we need a material ability to accomplish work. And I feel like that is something you were talking about before, but these celebrations, they're kind of demonstrating our abilities in a certain sense. They're demonstrating our place in the progressive social movement and in the national kind of discourse that each Communist Party is in. Having these celebration shows, oh, we're here, we're working, and we represent these platforms that you, the people, are interested in. But we can celebrate, but we should have some work and some basis beyond that. We need a real apparatus for performing work and including labor work. And that kind of focus is not really helped with these celebrations.
So yeah, it's basically again celebrating this, honoring that. Uh, the main issue would be like, is Nelson Mandela that top priority question today for communists to put it in the action plan? Like really, we have a lot of more important issues, and yet it's put here like it's essential question, let alone like saying the opinion on this thing. Another thing, the next one is developing joint activities against anti-communism, fascism, and the fabricated propaganda against the historical contribution of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics to all humanity. Again, this thing is what communists do basically every day. Every day we struggle against anti-communism and against anti-Sovietism, and it's a well-known issue. Why should it be like pointed in a specific way? I mean, not just that it's not just that it's low priority, but it's something that all communists should do by definition.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. Yeah, talking about, I think maybe they're responding to kind of economistic attitudes and things about, oh, we shouldn't talk about the Soviet Union, we shouldn't talk about Stalin, we should talk about national issues, local issues, and economic issues. So, I mean, that's the kind of point that could be helpful, but in the context, it gets kind of lost, among all these other points of the action plan. This one just kind of seems, I mean, yeah, as Vasily said, this should be what we were doing already. And it's important perhaps to point out that people should be doing it, but really we should expect communists are doing this. And it seems it's interesting to have it in this list alongside all these other points in the context of the rest of what's being said, including what we're going to talk about next.
I mean, currently it looks like the whole list is more of we're for everything good against everything bad. We will celebrate this, celebrate that, solidarity with this, strengthen that, develop these joint activities. So next thing, point number 7 is strengthening women's struggle against inequality, oppression, and discrimination by increasing mobilizations on March 8, International Women's Day, specifically for working women. And again, it's let's celebrate, like March 8, let's celebrate.
Right, and I suppose they're pointing out the importance of the women's issue and the importance of organizing women, but it's framed again in this language.
Yeah, I would also say that again, communists don't need to point attention to this topic specifically on March 8. They should do it on everyday basis, and this is what they're in fact do. Like all these things, exploitation, inequality, oppression, and discrimination, they happen constantly. They happen every day, and why should they only do it on March 8? Like again, putting this in plan of actions looks like something weird.
And then we have then we have the next point, number 8 on the point, which I think stands out with all the rest. It really kind of it seems a little weird, I would say, compared to the rest.
Yeah, let me voice it. So the point number 8 is acting against the arbitrary inclusion of Cuba in the list of state sponsors of terrorism and the interference in Cuba's internal affairs to raise solidarity with the Cuban people for the immediate and unconditional lifting of the economic, commercial, and financial blockade imposed by the US. In this context, a more active participation in the International Days of Solidarity with Cuba, which will be organized on the last weekend of each month. We call for participation in the 8th International Seminar for Peace and the Abolition of Foreign Military Bases to be held in Guantanamo, Cuba, to promote participation in the International Meeting of Solidarity with Cuba, in the 2nd International Meeting of Theoretical Publications of Left Parties and Movements, in the 3rd edition of the International Colloquium Patria to be held during the Cuban Press Day. Well, this point is very eclectic in the first place. You wanted to say something on this?
No, I mean, if you have something, I can talk about my thoughts after.
Yeah. So first of all, like all these, yeah. The first fact is that it's again a lot of solidarity with this, solidarity with that. The main issue, like the main question that every class-conscious communist can ask, all right, we have private property in the Constitution of Cuba being adopted in 2019, if I remember correctly. So the question that every communist can raise is, you say that like solidarity with Cuba, is Cuba socialist? Like, how would you say that Cuba is socialist? That they have Communist Party in power, but we have China where Communist Party is in power too. But does it make them communist? And in Cuba we have private property in the constitution of the country. And in fact, we have a lot of things that are more like for capitalism, not for socialism. And it's not just that, but also all these numerous events. It looks more like a program of events in support of Cuba, but not something that would be in priority for communists. Like, don't they participate in these things before? Like, they do it every year. Solidarity with this, solidarity with that. Plus, they mentioned this second international meeting of theoretical publications of left parties and movements, and it is because the first one was mentioned in the previous plan of actions in 2022. However, I tried to find some information on if it did really take place somewhere, and I could not find any, like neither in KKE's media nor in other organizations. So that's quite interesting. What was this meeting about, and was it even held in the first place? And they're talking now about the second one. But besides that, again, this is the point of another Cuba solidarity, but communists in fact have these Cuba solidarity statements from year to year. It was the same in the previous plan of actions, it was the same in 2021, in 2020, and years before that. But these points about Cuba, they don't answer the actual questions that communists can raise for Cuba government. Or, for example, well, I was speaking about capitalism, but we know that Cuba cooperates really closely with the Russian Federation, and Russian Federation is imperialist. Or with China, China is also imperialist. And if they do it, aren't they like in the imperialist camp now?
And well, we have other capitalist operations that are going on in Cuba at the moment with lots of international companies. There's Australian companies drilling oil wells for Cuba, and lots of international monopolies are operating in Cuba. So, I mean, this blockade is going on. But I think we need to look at the context for this blockade, and we can compare to Venezuela, perhaps. So recently there was a pause in the sanctions against Venezuela by the Biden administration of the U.S. So what was the result of this, and what's the point of this? Well, the point of it was basically to allow the U.S. oil company, the oil monopoly Chevron, to operate in Venezuela, which actually they've been doing, but it makes it more legal and more profitable. So now, Chevron, which has a huge influence in Venezuela, can increase their operations there. And this is the kind of thing that could be expected from Cuba, with the opening up of sanctions with Venezuela. You're going to have a growth of Chevron, and these international monopolies, um, and which some people would celebrate as, oh, they're bringing development. But I mean, Venezuela has lots of oil development. A lot of oil is being drilled. So the role of these international monopolies, um, are just going to have these negative effects that we always talk about with imperialist, establishing relations of exploitation and drawing value out of the country. I mean, Chevron is interested in making its own profits at the expense of the Venezuelan people, and they're not interested in development. And so, what will happen when Cuba suddenly opens up? And actually, there was a period where Cuba was opened up to U.S. business. Um, but and yes, it fits within the broader context of this action plan about we support everything that's good in the world. We support these basically good positions, but I think we need to, uh, talk about the context or think about the context and what will happen with capitalism in Cuba. Isn't there going to be a growth of capitalism in Cuba and a growth of Cuba's relations with international companies and international imperialism are going to be increased. They already have Italian companies in Venezuela and Russian and Belarus and Spanish in Venezuela. So you're going to have these international companies coming into Cuba, and they're going to bring development on the one hand, but what else? And we should be critically looking at what else is going on, and at the same time, talking about Guantanamo Bay and the U.S. Kind of occupation of Cuba, and the foreign military base and prison base, the horrible prison base that was on Guantanamo Bay. Cuba gets identified very particularly in this action plan, but Cuba is not unique in terms of these conditions. And I think this is something that happens a lot where we focus on one example of such a thing, one example of the foreign military and occupation, but this happens in many different countries around the world, and they don't get the same attention. And I guess the point of this is that, oh, there's a socialist government in Cuba. I mean, and that's what this action plan, kind of suggests, that there is a socialist or left-wing government in Cuba that we should defend. And that's why we should put our focus on ending the presence of the foreign military base there. But we're not giving the proper attention and the proper criticism of similar or identical occurrences in countries around the world. And so, we have this attention brought to us on Cuba, but there are much worse things or much worse bases where they commit torture and they do illegal extradition and all these horrible operations by the United States with these foreign military bases. The Guantanamo Bay is becoming less and less relevant for that. But there are other countries where we're just not looking at all. And so these countries like where I suppose there's a huge base still in Niger, where they do CIA operates these assassination drones and planes for their missions all across Africa. These sorts of things are really important as well. But Cuba has a particular attention put on it, and that really suggests that that it is socialist, and that we have to be in solidarity with this in solidarity with this, but less with that. And I'm concerned a little bit about that.
Plus, I would add that these statements are repeated every year, and again, every communist who wants to think, to know the position, he asks, you say you support this, you support that, you say you're in solidarity with Cuba, but why do you think Cuba is socialist? Like, simply because you believe so? Simply because it was a friend of the Soviet Union decades ago? Like, what is the real reason? They exist in the capitalist world. They have a lot of agreements with imperialist powers. They basically support them, and that's obvious in case of Russian Federation. Cuba issued a lot of statements supporting their actions, saying, yeah, they're against America, they're against American imperialism. Of course, American imperialism exists, but Russian one exists as well. And uh, well, if you're communist, then you should look, as they say in Russia, you should look truth in the eyes. You should say the truth, and it. If you ask Lenin, for example, he was showing the truth. We can find a quote where Lenin says that the name Soviet Socialist Republic doesn't actually mean there is socialism. It means the desire, the will of communists to build it. And he wasn't afraid of saying that we don't have socialism, we have capitalism, we have to work with many foundations. It was when the Soviet Union was making its way to socialism, and communists were not afraid to say how things are in reality, to name things their names. And I see.
And
Yeah, go on.
oh, I wanted to connect with what you're saying, about we should be, consciously expressing our views and ideas, and, communists are remiss to not, to hide our views. We don't want to hide our views. But this document is kind of saying without saying a certain position, which is that, in position one, or action point number one, NATO is the problem. In action point number 8, we say Cuba is our friend. This is setting out a certain view of the world and a certain view of the situation that's going on in the world. Basically saying that NATO is bad, but the anti-NATO bloc is good. I mean, that's what's explicitly implied by the kind of grand context, or the grand total of these action plans, when they list these particular issues. And we should say that, or they should say that if they believe that. But we know that that's not consistently agreed upon among these parties. But that's what's being expressed by some of these resolutions, that, we should not criticize Russia and China as much, and we should put all our criticism on NATO and the U.S. Well, really, the world isn't divided that way, and that is a false view of the world, where it's dichotomatically split in a perfect, two halves of the world, where there's a good half with even BRICS, the BRICS alliance, and the NATO alliance on the other side, when really, BRICS includes India, which is allied with the US as well. BRICS is led and includes China, which we've already mentioned, works with the US and works with this NATO imperialist bloc. So there isn't a firm dichotomy between the two blocks, but it's presented in these implicitly in these materials as if this is how we should understand the world situation.
Of course, I expect that there will be freaks who gonna describe our words as those radicals from Politsturm support American imperialism against Cuba, but well, if you say solidarity with oppressed Cuban people, well, basically all the peoples around the world are oppressed by capital. Russian people are oppressed, Ukrainian people are oppressed, and what is the difference then? This question, is left unanswered.
That's really what I was thinking of as well. That Cuba isn't unique. But by identifying it in this way, we're kind of presenting it as, oh, Cuba is this socialist holdout that we must defend. And there's similar thoughts about the DPRK, but the DPRK isn't getting this kind of attention and this kind of support. And there's all these sanctions against the DPRK and sanctions against Russia, but these same things aren't being said. So. But really, we shouldn't have the focus on Russia and North Korea, but we should see that Cuba is in a similar situation or a parallel situation with many imperialized countries, or we should say imperialist dependencies around the world, and treating Cuba in this special way, kind of implies that they have a certain relationship with imperialism, where they're the real fighters of it when. There is an imperialist entanglement in which Cuba has found itself. Cuba is participating in with, not just Russian and Chinese companies, but international companies in general.
Yeah, also since you mentioned DPRK, this is another interesting topic since the so-called Workers' Party of Korea is in SolidNet, yet its ideology is not just revisionist, but it's openly anti-Marxist. The whole Juche ideology is based on the fact, like on the theory that they develop, that Marxism is obsolete or that Marxism is even wrong. You can find different statements from their leaders that Marxism was allegedly wrong on nationalist question, that Marxism was wrong on this, on that, and yet these guys sit in SolidNet and they are not opposed.
Right, and well, we're called on to have solidarity with Cuba, but Cuba did not sign on with this resolution of solidarity for the Communist Party of Venezuela. So we're called on explicitly in point 8 for this solidarity with Cuba, which they don't share with repressed communist parties in other countries. And the same with the Workers' Party of Korea. They attended this meeting in Izmir this year, in 2023, and yet they didn't sign on for this condemnation of the repression of the Communist Party of Venezuela. So it's this double standard where if it fits within their capitalist interests and their international diplomatic interests, they'll be in solidarity. But in this case, their capitalist interests, their international imperialist relations, cause them to be against solidarity with the PCV. So such a entity, such a state power as Cuba, which again, they have close relations with Venezuela and diplomatic friendliness, that causes them not to have solidarity with the PCV.
Right, I think we will go further, and the next question is also one of the hot topics of the day. This one is point number 9, demanding the end of the brutal Israeli attacks targeting the Palestinian people and the end of occupation and the right of the Palestinian people in self-determination, resistance, and an independent sovereign state, demanding the right of return of refugees and securing the conditions in accordance with relevant UN resolutions and the release of the Palestinian political prisoners, condemning the so-called deal of the century and the colonial and discriminatory policies of the US and Israel, including the construction and expansion of settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories, Syrian Golan Heights, Sheba Farms, and Kfar Shouba Heights in south of Lebanon. In this context, commemorating the International Day of Solidarity on November 29 for the Palestinian people. Well, we said and wrote a lot of words about this conflict, the currently going conflict in Palestine. But regarding this exact point, well, you read and you ask, right? You say about solidarity with Palestinian people, but Hamas started this conflict, like the recent one. We're not speaking about historical perspective. It's well-known fact that Israel occupied the territories of the Palestinian state, but why is there no word about Hamas? And it's not something, like I don't want to look like we're specifically searching for these bad spots. It's a question of everyday struggle. You see, like you're as communist, you say, in solidarity with Palestinian people, I support their struggle, and you're met with questions. So you support Hamas terrorists, you're for terrorists, right? And what would you reply with? Well, communists, the so-called Marxist-Leninist pole, would suggest to keep silent on that, or to denounce everyone who touches this question as supporters of the US, NATO, and the EU, and also social democrats. This is almost exactly how it was written in, for example, Kiki's Kutsumbas article, where he approached this question in this context. Or they would suggest to say that Hamas is a national liberational movement, but then you're met with question that they are actually created by Israel, and they are supported by Islamists, by Iran, who has its own imperialist interests in the region. They are supported by Middle Eastern reactionary monarchies, supported by Qatar, by Arab Emirates, and those are well-known reactionaries. How can you say that this is progressive and this is national liberation when such forces support them? And communists are also suppressed there because Hamas itself was created as a means to split and to isolate the actual progressive Palestinian forces, up to the point that Hamas was able to create whole military industry in the Gaza Strip. Right? This wouldn't be possible without billions of dollars provided by Iran and other Islamists.
And well, there's a problem in the communist movement today where, we kind of say in a kind of rhetorical sense, we're asked to respond to the question of, do you support Hamas and do you support terrorism? But people have actually come out and said, yes, we do support terrorism. Yes, we do support the killing of civilians in this way or in this struggle. And so that's the kind of confusion that we have to deal with and respond to. That people aren't, it's not clear how exactly we should have, what attitude we should have towards Hamas. And so, people who call themselves communists are taking an explicitly pro-Hamas stance and saying that, there's a kind of Islamic socialism that's being developed by Hamas or Hezbollah, being a more left-wing example. It's very similar things. And so the question of what we should do with Hamas, it is left open. And so when we leave this question open about should we support Hamas or should we not support Hamas, people are going to end up supporting Hamas. And if not, they descend to a kind of more moderate position and they say, oh, I support the PFLP. The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, because they say that we're working with Hamas. They say that we're in a joint struggle. The PFLP says that we're in a joint struggle with Hamas for this shared goal of national liberation. And so in an absence or in a void of a kind of positive stance to take on these groups and on this struggle, people are going to kind of stumble through and develop these positions. And that's causes people to have very extreme positions. Some people have even, are even more extreme than I think Hamas is, where they're calling for, Israelis should be deported from Israel and things like this, because there's not a clear answer for what is a responsible position towards this Palestinian struggle. And there's also a complete delusion and complete distance from reality, where what's going to happen to Gaza is horrible. People are kind of celebrating the resistance war, and as you pointed out, Hamas started. Hamas declared this war, and you'd expect them to have a kind of military plan where they expect a certain development in the military situation to happen. Well, what we see is that a really horrible situation for Gaza is unfolding, and there's now a potential for ethnic cleansing and genocide of this Gaza area of Palestinians that has never been possible for the past 20, 30 years. And we should be responding to that reality. We should be responding to the objective material reality that's going on. And people say, "Oh, the only thing we can do is support Hamas in their guerrilla struggle, and Israel would never win in an occupation where Hamas is always opposing their occupation and always offering resistance to their settlement." Well, does this resistance, what is actually capable with this resistance? What is being done, and what is the result of this resistance? We can say, "Oh, we will never stop resisting," but well, what happens when 2 million people are deported from the Egyptian desert? Is that a reasonable result for action? If a communist acted and it had this result, that would be condemned, and people would say, "Oh, you did the struggle wrong, and you resulted in this negative outcome." But I feel like we're not approaching the issue in the straightforward way.
Yeah, I would also add that we will probably see some guys rushing in hysteria and saying that we have fallen for Western political agenda, but reality is that despite many real fake news, sorry, they are real. I mean, despite a lot of fake information spread about Palestine, there are indeed real evidences of Hamas killing civilians, taking hostages. All these things are real, and if communists align with Palestine without saying that they are not friends with Hamas, they do not support Islamists, it's something that they would be seen as supporters of terrorism. And it doesn't matter at this point what is the definition of terrorism, because I saw some takes like capitalists actually decide what is terrorism. So if someone says that you support Hamas, it's wrong. Hamas are not terrorists. Again, this is another questionable thing, but in general, this point also comes to the point that we discussed earlier many times. Solidarity Days commemorate that, plan of actions or plan of festivities. And it's going even further. Points 10 and 11, I'm not going to voice them because their essence is solidarity with Cyprus, support Western Sahara, support, again, Syrian people in the struggle against criminal groups supported by reactionary forces and US, NATO, EU imperialism. But, well, it's a well-known fact that Russian imperialism is also engaged in this area. They are not somehow defending Syria from US, NATO, EU imperialism. In fact, they're struggling for their own interests. And for example, infamous Wagner Group also worked there, and they even committed some war crimes.
And well, I want to talk about the point 9. One different thing that we didn't touch on about the independent sovereign state. And so this is kind of touching on the two-state solution thing that we're hearing, and I believe the Communist Party of Spain, which is now in power in Spain today. They're part of the ruling coalition. They're putting forward this the two-state solution, and even the Biden administration, the very pro-Israel, very Zionist supporting Biden administration in the United States, they're also putting forward this two-state solution and saying, "Oh, we need to resolve this with the establishment of a sovereign Palestine state." Well, I feel like there's a flaw or a gap when of the IMCWP are progressive on this issue in the same way that reformist, social democrats and extreme pro-Israel people are. How can we communists have the same position as an extremely pro-Israel president of the United States? And I think this reflects, a serious problem with the attitude towards the independent Palestinian state. Like we mentioned before, that Hamas was funded by Israel or supported by Israel, and Israel worked to coordinate with Qatar to get funding from Qatar sent to Gaza and Hamas. So the reason that Israel did this explicitly was to split and undermine the unified Palestinian national movement, and make sure that there couldn't be a Palestinian state because of the disunity between Gaza and the West Bank. So putting forward this two-state solution Palestinian state, it really shows the kind of limited address that we can have to this situation on this basis that currently we have this corrupt government of the in the West Bank, and they're about to get this big gas and oil deal from Gaza. Israel and the United States are about to be pumping gas out of the Gaza waters, and the dividends, this revenue from this gas trade, is going to be going to the Palestinian ruling bourgeoisie, basically in the West Bank. So this is a kind of dependent puppet state that we can expect to be established as a Palestinian state. I mean, that's why Biden supports the creation of this two-state solution, when in reality, Israeli capital is going to remain in the West Bank. Israeli people, Israeli settlers, are going to keep their properties in many cases, and if not the kind of gross extremist settlers, certainly you're going to have these Israeli real estate companies and the Israeli big monopoly bourgeoisie. They're going to be controlling the economy of this Palestinian state, which is based in the West Bank and presumably Gaza. And yeah, putting forward this kind of bourgeois state isn't going to defend the Palestinian rights. And in fact, this Palestinian state is going to be a tool for the puppetry that Israel and the United States want to set up.
True. I would also say that the actual whole topic of the 23rd meeting was the question of Palestine, despite the fact that it was 2 weeks after this conflict that meeting took place, and it was scheduled for a year before, in 2022. Of course, we also engaged our comrades from participant organizations with this question, and of course it was replied like that it is so, simply because it was the only question that all the sides could agree upon. So yeah, the whole topic of Palestine and the response of the communist movement in case of SolidNet is the result of the structure of very broad assets of this association. And the next, yeah, I think we will go further, and the next things are, again, a lot of words about solidarity with this, solidarity with that. Basically all the points from the last 4 things we've discussed before. I would also add some on these international anti-imperialist organizations, in particular the World Federation of Trade Unions, the World Peace Council, the World Federation of Democratic Youth, and the Women's International Democratic Federation. These organizations, or again associations, remain unknown for the majority of communists, for the majority of broad masses, and yeah, they could be somewhat big and famous organizations 50 years ago, but now they are not. Nobody knows them except for these festivals of democratic youth that are used more for promoting this or that country rather than the actual federation. And the whole essence of these organizations is unknown. Why do you support the relics of the Cold War if it would be way more better and efficient to create the new ones that would actually tell something to the broad masses? And if you have nothing to add, then I would also say some words about the place of the next meeting. And as you can see, it's not mentioned in the last part of this plan of action. We also asked our comrades about that, and turned out that the place of the next meeting is going to be Beirut, Lebanon. And just reminding, Lebanon is situated right on the border with Israel. So it's really dangerous to go there. Like, what is the reason that all the leadership of the communist organizations should go in this dangerous place where they could be destroyed by either by Hezbollah terrorists or by Israeli military? And the answer is that, again, nobody even wanted to organize the next meeting. No organization decided to take responsibility for this. And it was only Lebanese CP, which is actually social chauvinist, asked if they could do it. But again, going there is simply dangerous. It's like, I don't know, making meeting in the capital of Iran, in Tehran. It would be basically the same.
Yeah, or in Donbass in eastern Ukraine or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, currently the situation of fighting in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon, the south of Lebanon is really controlled by Hezbollah, which is a kind of affiliated with Iran. I shouldn't say kind of, it is affiliated with Iran, but that's not really the relevant thing. That the condition of fighting is going to be Israel has issued some ultimatum to Hezbollah recently that Hezbollah has to withdraw from the Lebanese southern border, and because Israel wants to put its settlers back on these northern territories of the Israeli territory, and the occupied regions, like Golan Heights and Sheba Farms that are mentioned in the document, in the action plan, these occupied areas. But so the real concern is that there's going to be an increased war between Hezbollah in Lebanon and Israel. So this is, Beirut is going to next year is more likely to be a war zone than this year. But I believe there is mention that there's some concerns that the Iranian party couldn't attend such a location.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. But
Uh,
in general, the question of this, like choosing this place for the next meeting, like even in terms of SolidNet, it's really weird.
well, yeah, and there's the other two that we kind of glossed over, number 12 and 13. Number 12 being about natural disasters, and solidarity. That was a big part of the Greek communist activity this year, or I believe early this year, with the earthquake in Turkey, in Western Turkey. I believe that the Greek communists and the Turkish communists worked a lot together to deliver aid materials, and that's really interesting to see. But it would be good to see this kind of activity and this kind of material work being done for other issues like labor issues as well. We see a lot of, and maybe that's just on perspective and what's being published from these groups, that they're really publicizing their participation in this disaster aid, and less for labor issues. But I think uh, but anyway, yeah. So it's an interesting point that they bring up with number 12, and then number 13, the popular mobilizations against the environment. So we're kind of saying that we should participate in these large rallies and protest activities against climate change, and these are really notable in the West. And I'm sure they don't want to draw connections to what's happening in the West, but really they're being dominated by these kinds of silly protest actions where people are throwing paint on things and things like this. Um, and So I don't know what the IMCWP means by their participation in these mobilizations, but it's an interesting position to be part of this broader movement with environment.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's a good time to make a conclusion on the topic of this plan of actions. In fact, it's not a plan of actions, it's something that would be in the middle between plan of festivities and a plan of everything good against everything bad. It doesn't answer the actual problems of the current international communist movement. It doesn't show the ways how they should be solved. And of course, as was described numerous times, this weak plan is a result of a compromise. And we can clearly say that in this case, the social chauvinists are the winners. You see, all the points basically in this or that case promote their point of view. If we take the first one, it's about imperialist wars, and as we were told, everybody can describe the imperialist war as they want, but it also says actions against EU, NATO, etc., etc. So if you're real Marxist-Leninist and you say, like, you see, we need to oppose imperialist wars, here comes the social chauvinist and says, you see, all the communists met on this meeting and they agreed to fight against EU and NATO. You see, they put America in priority. America is the worst evil there, and we need to fight for progressive Russia and China, etc., etc., etc. And this thing can be applied to basically every point of this plan of actions. This plan of actions is not an actual plan of actions. And we all know what are the real actions that communists are required to do. They are required to have theoretical unity, to have fierce ideological struggle on the most important questions, like the question of China, the question of so-called actual existing countries, the questions of how to act, how to work in the current conditions, what is the modern imperialist system, what is the modern proletariat. There are a lot of issues, and all of them are basically unanswered. And it's not only a problem of this year. All these topics are ignored for basically decades, and we see either very formal responses, very vague responses, very general responses, or we see no responses at all, only ignoring things. This is wrong, and these things should be fixed. And also, the big problem is to make a decisive demarcation with social chauvinist parties, to call things their names, to say these organizations support imperialists. They are not anti-imperialist or progressive. In fact, they only support another camp. And all these things should be touched, they should be described, they should be pointed on. And this is what we don't see. Like, if you make a compromise, then have an honor of admitting it, saying that yes, we were forced to sign this because we wanted to have a compromise, and instead we were shown these things are shown as examples of unity, examples of communist action at work. Well, every class conscious worker or communist will look on this and will laugh. They would say, and these are communists. And it's even more important because, well, if Marxist-Leninists don't do their work, then other hostile forces will do it. There are Maoists, there are Trotskyists, and all of them seek for every opportunity to destroy and denigrate the Marxist-Leninist movement.
And we see, here in the action plan, something that's not reflected in the development that happened over the past year. One of the big things that happened this year and last year was this argument that occurred between the RCWP, the Russian Communist Workers' Party, and the KKE, where the KKE denounced, the Greek communists denounced the pro-Russian stance, explicitly, kind of taking an imperialist stance that we've been talking about, this fake anti-imperialism, where really you support just the opposition bloc. The Greek communists called them out, and this unfolded into this big development where the Russian Communist Workers' Party was basically ejected or left an initiative of this IMCWP. So we have this the split that happens within the IMCWP, which is for the best. It's for the best that we don't have these voices dominating our resolutions and our conversations, and it's good for us to have a new initiative. So they canceled the European Communist Initiative, which was this block of parties that were it was a forum within a forum, but now it's including more of the better parties, we can say, under this new organization of the European Communist Action. And so we have this development happen where, we're taking the, fake anti-imperialists out of the initiative and creating a better initiative that's probably going to be able to have better resolutions, more, the parties are in better agreement on what needs to be done about the imperialist world system, so that you could have a better position. But this kind of positive growth or this good development that's happening where we're clarifying and drawing distinctions between the positions, this isn't reflected in the action plan. This isn't reflected in SolidNet movement, even though China and North Korea and Cuba, they refuse to sign on to for things like the solidarity statement for the Venezuelan party, and yet we keep them around, and so we could have more positive developments like this and creating more clear and coherent initiatives, but we would need to see some clear resolutions from that work. And this isn't being reflected in the meeting that was held this year, and next year I'm sure it will be the same. Even though we're all the time clarifying our distinctions between these positions, next year the problems are probably going to repeat themselves.
Well, I wanted to touch upon the topic of the initiative a bit later. There were also two organizations accepted in SolidNet, and these are the Communist Party of Kenya and something progressive socialist party from Kuwait. Let me see the name. Can you say something on this topic?
Oh yeah, I mean this really reflects the kind of a backwards movement in there's a lot of growth to be made in Africa, a lot of things that we need to be doing for the proletariat or getting in touch with the communist movement in Africa. But the Communist Party of Kenya is a particularly, negative contribution. They are really like more like this group that formed against the IMCWP. What we mentioned before, the World Anti-Imperialist Platform, briefly, that RCWP joined. Well, this is kind of what the Communist Party of Kenya believes, that the Communist Party of Kenya are devoted adherents to the Chinese model and Chinese form of socialism, which is capitalism. And the CP of Kenya, used to be a social democratic party, and it maintains this kind of social democratic relationship with their own state, the Kenyan government. They're not as critical of the Kenyan government as they should be. And in terms of class ideology, they're completely backwards. And their youth group, the Kenyan Communist Party youth group, says that peasants need a party of their own class. This is something that they've said explicitly, and they organize mainly, almost entirely, the peasantry of Kenya, and certain strata of this peasantry of Kenya that have relationships with the land, and is why they're they have such a high presence in online media, and now we're bringing them into this meeting, which is already confusing young communists, and we see in the European Communist Action group, a lot of these members who are attending these meetings are really young people, in their 20s and 30s, even into their teens, participating in these meetings, and lots of young people don't have this history or don't have this understanding for clarifying what these groups are, what group stands for what, and so this confusion is really amplified by the inclusion of things like the CPK and the action plan problems we've talked about.
Yeah, and the second one is Kuwaiti progressive movement, but in essence it's basically the same. It also supports Russia against American imperialism, it's also, as far as I know, a fan of China, so they are no difference from the previous one. So it means that basically two organizations that are supportive of social chauvinists were accepted in SolidNet, and the actual platform for this is unknown. In general, I would say that we don't know what are the criteria for SolidNet members to accept organizations there. Like, how do they differ a party from a group? And yeah, it's a common fact, it's well-known fact that not all the organizations there are parties. In fact, they can have groups of less than 100 people that would still hold their place in SolidNet and behave like they're big organization, which is quite funny. And also, since you mentioned initiative, I expect some nerds to come later and say, you are actually wrong because initiative is actually not a part of SolidNet. Initiative was created by KKE in basically a decade ago in October 2013, and well, it lasted until last October. I mean, early September, when it was dissolved. And right now it's planned to be replaced with ECA, European Communist Action, which is praised as the actual initiative that would move the case of Marxism-Leninism forward in Europe. However, in reality, let's start with the fact that throughout this decade, initiative saw no success, despite common phrases about it making positive things, it making valuable experience, contribution, etc., etc. In reality, this organization was only accumulating a lot of freaks, a lot of opportunist and revisionist groups and organizations, and it actually stopped functioning properly even before 2022. If you open their site, you can actually see that the posts there in many sections were really outdated. Like they dated 2018, 2019, and the activities of this initiative were expressed largely, again, in numerous statements, in numerous resolutions, and solidarity statements. Of course, this is something that we've been opposing for really, really long period. And, well, on one side, yes, we can see that the members of the European Communist Action, organizations like Hungarian Workers' Party, the new Communist Party of Yugoslavia, etc., are not members of the European Communist Action. But on the other side, we must remember that all these organizations that sat in this, that are sitting in this ECA, were also members of ECI, and they barely did anything to oppose these exact revisionism and opportunism that were taking place in those aforementioned groups and organizations. Of course, we would hope for the best, but you must understand that it's only through hard work and through decisive actions, through telling truth, the communists will succeed. They won't succeed through fake unity or through false unity with different deviations. If we need to take necessary actions, then we must do them. And well, one can say that there is a place for discussion. We need to discuss this. We need to discuss that. That this work can be done only in a slow way. But well, the initiative existed for basically a decade. When it was created, there was basically a status quo in the European Communist movement, and when it was dissolved, it was basically the same. This is the big problem, and of course, there are no guarantees that ECA will not repeat the same fate.
Right, and we already have a kind of wacko, bizarro, antithesis to the ECA, which exists, the WAP, the World Anti-Imperialist Platform, they're going to be, you know, speaking and acting, and they don't really have any organizational support, any body of actual members and parties behind them. But it's the appearance of speech and the appearance of critical voice. And so the ECA has to be able to compete, in this direct competition with these people who are saying, oh, we have an equal platform to the ECA, we have an equal, right to our position. But on the other side, they have the funding and support of, like the Russian state media or other state medias from Iran or China. You have people like Haas Infrared or Caleb Maupin, these groups and people who are Christopher Halali from the PC USA. He's a part of the WAP. And they're getting the support from these state media groups. That's access to millions and millions of dollars that the ECA is going to have to compete with. And the ECA is more legitimate. They actually have, the WAP doesn't have actual parties behind it with actual membership, unlike the ECA. But the ECA has to compete and be able to materially contest what the WAP is putting forward. And it looks like the WAP is a failure, but the threat is still there that activities like this from the WAP and this social chauvinist sphere are very strong, and they're very loud. And young people are really listening to this, listening to what these WAP style people have to say, and they're going to rally to one or the other. So the ECA has to be able to match or operate at that level.
Mm-hmm. I can also add that in the WAP, the big power is so-called CPGBML, the Communist Party of Great Britain Marxist-Leninist, which was making quite funny accusations of KKE, of allegedly supporting Ukrainian nationalists, even accused them of being Trotskyists in their materials. Like, you can see some excerpts on your screen right now. Like, they try to accuse KKE of being Trotskyist, and well, it's quite funny, but yeah, the thing is that this organization is in fact not so different from SolidNet. It's a broad association with different anti-imperialist blah blah blah, and the only major difference is that there are different freaky organizations that sometimes are openly funded by actual imperialist powers like Russia or China. And it's a well-known fact that CPGBML, for example, worked with George Galloway's Workers' Party of Britain, and the latter was actually funded by Russia Today. He was a guest on one of their programs in the United Kingdom before they were closed after events of February 2022. And this CPGBML is well known for sharing materials by Russian social chauvinists, such as you can see on your screen right now, that Russia is fighting neo-Nazism in Ukraine. And of course, this one was created by CPRF. And I, as a Russian communist, can say that CPRF is a party of capitalists. It's filled with federal agents, and yeah, in fact, it's closer to the Communist Party of China than to any other real communist organization. So yes,
Right, and the
yeah, go on.
well, the American side is similar, if not no better, where you have the Party of Communist USA, which was originally not explicitly pro China, not explicitly pro AES, but there was a development within the PCUSA where the pro social chauvinists, the pro Russian side, seized power with help from these very suspicious individuals like Christopher Halali, and now they don't really have a major membership, but they have this platform, and so they use this platform, you know, they have to say in support of Russia and China. But really what I wanted to get at is that, young Americans are going to be looking at, or young people in general, looking at the situation and going, oh, IMCWP, their action plan, it's kind of in agreement with a lot of the things the WAP are saying. And that, that's the worst possible outcome, that people think that we're the same. And that's the opposite of what I think a lot of members of the IMCWP want. But people are going to say, "Oh, what? IMCWP agrees with me," and they're going to pull up this material and they're going to use it to say, "Look, this agrees with WAP."
Mm-hmm. I would also say that these things that happened in 2022, like, yes, they had a discussion, even somewhat split, but actually KKE, for example, was supporting RCWP years before 2022, and their social chauvinist views were well known for a decade before that, and through all this time RCWP actually used their connections with KKE to promote themselves. Like, you can criticize us for social chauvinism, but look, international communists are working with us. Even the Greek communists are working with us. We are with international communist movement. We have support from them, and this was problematic. And yes, they had a discussion during the previous year. They have a lot of things now, but well, there is RCWP, but there are other organizations. And for example, we know that the Greek Communist Youth, the KNE, is actually working right now with the new Communist Party of Yugoslavia. Just this summer, they had a joint meeting against, again, NATO and European Union. But what about Russia and China? These things are a common problem, and this is where we think clear demarcation should be made.
Yeah. And people don't have these clarifications made for them. Lots of young people are coming into the communist movement now, and they don't have this background of information, and they're desperate to truly understand what's going on, and why are the communist parties failing to do practical activity? Why are we failing to have a coherent international movement? And the reasons aren't being explicitly explained. And so this goes back to the problem with the doctrinaire language that we're hearing about, and this kind of what how do we call it, just kind of saying things in this very formulaic language and this very vague language. Young people don't understand what's going on, and so they're going to go to people who explain these things in social chauvinist language, in very rhetorically strong Philistine language that's clear to people, and these people, young people today, have, problems with education as well, that education is failing people. And so they're going to be more susceptible to being misled and more susceptible to not understanding vague statements and being drawn towards clear but rhetorically strong and incorrect statements. And that's especially true for Americans. Americans see America as the problem, classic American-centric, American exceptionalist attitude. They're going to come to this and they're going to say, yeah, of course, America's the big bad guy. I live in America. Or if you live in the West, oh yeah, America's, especially, in Serbia, this is a big thing. And in Russia as well, I'm sure that they say, oh, America's the problem. America destroyed the Soviet Union. If only we got rid of America. But that's not really explaining what really happens in the world, and that's not really explaining what's going on in the world currently. So it's our responsibility to explain these things and to explain, doctrinaire language isn't always going to help people understand these issues.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also important to add that we see no criticism of these problems from actual ML organizations, from ML point of view. And in fact, this is what we approached with the actual KKE representatives. We asked about them, and the response we were provided with was very formal. At the end, we were told that the work is difficult. We don't need to hurry. The future will put everything on their place. We only created the first attempt of ML poll. The future will decide who is right and who is wrong. And well, what we can say is that if Marxist-Leninists don't do self-criticism, then they will be criticized by their opponents. And in this case, it's worth mentioning that Trotskyists, who were for decades afraid of calling themselves communists, they actually started doing so. They even they try to show that they are indeed the real communists. International Marxist Tendency, from having their main organization in the Great Britain, Socialist Appeal, started actually promoting communist symbols. They started calling themselves communists, and they even announced yesterday that they will have Revolutionary Communist Party created in 2024, and they will call their main newspaper The Communist. I'm saying that because, well, they also see the weakness of the international communist movement, and, well, why not? They decided that they can appropriate this name for themselves, and it's even more noticeable because, as I said, Trotskyists for decades were afraid of calling themselves communists because, well, for them it meant Stalinists. They were also afraid of siding with Stalinists, and this is why they constantly referred to themselves as, well, besides Trotskyists, as revolutionary socialists, as Marxists, as progressive socialists, etc., etc. And, well, this tendency is quite interesting. We see that the enemies of communists actually see their mistakes, their weaknesses, and they don't hesitate to use them. So if Marxist-Leninists don't organize, then they will be destroyed, they will be suppressed, they will be stumped by their enemies. And their enemies are the capitalists, other hostile forces like Maoists, like Trotskyists, everybody else. They all exist, and they all watch upon communists.
Right. The Trotskyist groups don't hide their disdain and their hatred for these communists like us. So as soon as they have any influence or any ability to cause some impact on the movement, they're going to use that to kind of in a partisan way, bring about their own forces and suppress ours. And this is really being reflected right now in the United States. We're talking about these Trotskyists being a kind of growing and their groups are getting bigger and bigger. Well, we see that in the Democratic Socialists of America, the big social democratic bloc of the U.S., that the Trotskyists have a big voice and a big platform, and they're they get to use that platform within the DSA. This is that entryist kind of thing, and they form a clique. There's things called like the Marxist Unity Group and things like this within the DSA that the Trotskyists have formed. Of course, this reflects, their willingness to work with social democracy and put forward the goals of social democracy, so that it shows their opportunism. But they're operating in many areas, and this presence within the DSA it mirrors their kind of entryism into the labor movement as well. And so they're going to have their politics being put forward in their activities in labor and in the DSA. The DSA is very anti-communist, anti-Soviet Union in many ways, or they appropriate it like all Trotskyists do. They appropriate the Soviet Union. The DSA does, but they condemn Stalin and the actual construction period of socialism in the USSR. We even other groups, like the so-called Hoxhaist groups, American Party of Labor in the United States, they're the big one. In Tunisia, the Hoxhaist groups, the Hoxhaist Party in Tunisia back in the Arab Spring, they were involved in this kind of bringing about this bourgeois, liberal, democratic uprising. So these are the kinds of things that are that are being done. And the reason I brought up the APL and the Hojis is that, the APL is working closely with the DSA. The APL is working closely with Trotskyist groups on the ground in local instances. So these figures aren't afraid of working with these counter counterintuitive groups, like the DSA. We've seen what the DSA has done and is doing, not good things. And we've seen, like Bernie Sanders, their big hero for the past many years, is now, or exposed himself as being very pro-Israel, and not supporting the politics that they pretend to have. But so they're working in an opportunist circle, these Trotskyists and social democrats, and they're not afraid to work in these opportunist circles to advance their interests. So we have to be able to, have our own organizations that aren't opportunist, but which can contend with these groups which are strengthened by opportunism. And to talk a little more about Trotskyism, and the strength of Trotskyism is that they have the support of the bourgeoisie. And this is the support of the ruling class that they've had for decades and decades that made them so, the Trotskyist organizations were so big in the 60s and 70s. Partly we now know and has been exposed because of the active, help of the state. In the United Kingdom, the SWP was identified as being helpful by the secret police, the MI5. They infiltrated and destroyed, many left-wing groups, but they left the Trotskyist SWP to be this big left-wing group to outcompete and to quash the voice of all the other detractors. So and today this persists, and we have Trotskyists being published by Harvard and Oxford, and getting money and getting publicity from bourgeois, legitimate bourgeois sources. And that's a consistent topic of this conversation has been legitimacy, and where do we draw legitimacy and attention from the public from? Well, the Trotskyists have the support of big publishers and the big bourgeoisie, whether it's Haymarket or Verso or all these other, left-wing publishers. They this money that's publishing books, supports this Trotskyist opportunist program. And so, we have to be able to materially compete, I guess is what I would like to put forward, that they have the advantage, they have the advantage of support from the bourgeoisie, and they have the advantage of all these opportunist groups that they can work with, whether it's the DSA or whether it's APL or whatever else. And so they're going to be strengthened, and they're going to get stronger and stronger. And so are we going to get stronger? Or are we going to be, able to put our ideas forward? That's really a question now, and I think people commentating on this video now, and what we talked about before, that communists, we're not doing as much activity as we should be. We're not the communist parties aren't capable of the kind of work that they need to be. But before even activity is possible, we can't even get our statements together. We can't even get our platforms and our positions clarified. So how can we unite people to form a working organization if we can't even, have a clear platform for this is what we believe, this is what we want to fight for? It makes it impossible to respond to what these Trotskyists are doing, and these Trotskyists are going to keep saying, "Oh, we're just as good as MLs. We're the same as communists. We're Trotskyists. We have all the same beliefs," and they're going to be repeating some good positions. But are we going to be able to do the same thing that they are? That remains to be seen.
Mm-hmm. Well, I also expect some questions like you criticize everyone, but what do you do yourself? And in this sphere, I can say that we have big successes. First of all, I can say that currently the whole possibility of the stream, well, I'm from Russia, from former Soviet countries, and Comrade Thomas from the United States was made thanks to the work of our organization. In fact, I can say that our organization is doing the best in the international sphere among all the Russian communist organizations. We constantly produce materials, news materials, analysis of everyday class struggle around the world. We have comrades from many countries in our organization, from former Soviet countries, from the countries of the European Union and the United Kingdom, from the United States, from Latin America, and even Asian region. And we are all united not on some personal friendship relations or something, but we're united on one program because we're Marxist-Leninists. We know what we struggle for, and we united voluntarily in this organization. We also produce a lot of content for international communists, and this is how we establish connections between communists of each country. The communists have always been known for having their international solidarity, and this is what we're currently lacking: actual solidarity, not just empty statements. So in this sphere, I think we can make a conclusion, and well, the results of the year 2023 for the international communist movement are these. The status quo remains, and we see that social chauvinists and other hostile powers like Trotskyists are actually aware of this, and they use it for their own good. Social chauvinists keep establishing their own separate associations from SolidNet, and Trotskyists on the other side are pushing to claim the name of communists for themselves. And in this case, for Marxist-Leninists, the actual communists, it is very important to establish single theoretical platform and to establish organizational unity. Of course, this can be done only by objective understanding of reality through harsh and uncompromised criticism of the current situation, showing that social chauvinists are indeed social chauvinists, that their theoretical views and their practical actions are supportive of actual imperialist powers. They are not anti-imperialist, they are only supportive of another imperialist camp, and that practical unity can be done only by following theoretical unity, and this one can be made only on the platform of Marxist-Leninist theory.
Right, and we have all this growth in the past year. Politsturm has had a lot of great growth and new members and these things, and it doesn't just come from nowhere. It comes from people are looking for a real platform to support, and it's unusual that we're so unusual. We shouldn't be so unique in the communist movement that our positions really stand out to people, and yeah, so we're able to attract people on the basis of this ideology, and that really strengthens us, that people who are interested in real Marxist-Leninist ideology are the ones who join up. And so that just it's this snowballing effect, where we're strengthened by our comrades from other countries who agree with us in many ways, and our internal democracy improves with all this time, with all these new voices. So we're just going to keep strengthening, and the question is, what is the world communist movement going to be doing at the same time? We're going to be doing our work, but we can't, operate alone, and we're going to keep engaging with the world communist movement. And as Vasily mentioned, we have conversations with other members of the IMCWP and other groups. So and we're going to keep up this dialogue, but we're not going to be passive in terms of the future development next year of the world movement.
Exactly. I would add that the class struggle knows no mercy. Either you struggle and you win, or you fail, you lose because of apathy, because of passivity, because of any other issues, and you go down in history. That's quite simple. Either capitalists or communists, either exploiters or workers. This is the reality, and of course, we as communists are interested in our cause to prevail. Of course, you can always support us by joining our organization. You can do it by filling the application form in the chat if you have not done it before, and you can also support us on Patreon. I will send the link in the chat. So we've been talking for more than 2 hours. It's been a long travel in the history of the communist movement for this year in recent events. I hope you all enjoyed this. Don't forget to hit the like button, share and subscribe if you didn't do it before. And I think that's it. Thank you for joining, comrades.
Yes, thank you to all the listeners for making it through this lengthy conversation, and hopefully it was filled with as much enriching discussion for you as I felt it was. I think we're approaching some of the most important questions of our time and of the communist movement. So if it takes a couple hours to say and if that's hard for our viewers to sit along for, I'm really glad to see that there's a group of people who were here the whole time and being engaged with these questions, and I'm sure that this discussion is only going to grow louder and louder.
Thank you for joining in today, comrades. Goodbye.